I went from fat to shredded, cured my food addiction, and reversed obesity brain damage. This 15-chapter video will give you over 10 easy practical methods to end your overeating for good. And be sure to stick around to the end because you don't want to miss what's in the bonus 16th chapter. But first, let's see how fat we've really gotten. Obesity has tripled over the last 60 years. And while many online gurus blame the government and its food guides, what's overlooked is that people who follow them are often healthier than those who don't. The main issue here isn't that we don't know what to eat. It's that people are bad at sticking to diets. According to psychologist Daniel Kahneman, most of our choices are subconscious and intuitive. Our brains are wired to seek calories because in the past they were scarce. And so this is something that scientists call an evolutionary mismatch. Put simply, our brains haven't adapted to today's modern environment. And this is the primary cause of obesity. So what can we do about this? Well, when discussing obesity and overeating, we can't move forward without understanding the dreaded calorie. Wilbur Atwater was the first to measure the calorie content of food, establishing the well-known values of 4 calories per gram of carbs, 4 per gram of protein, 9 per gram of fat, and 7 per gram of alcohol. His research confirmed a simple equation: change in body energy equals energy in minus energy out, or as you've heard it, calories in versus calories out. Calories are simply the energy from food that our body uses to pump blood, breathe, and move. Some go towards building muscle, and anything that's left over goes towards fat. Now here's something that will piss many of you off. Atwater showed that when it comes to weight gain or loss, a calorie is a calorie, regardless of whether it comes from carbs, proteins, fats, or alcohol. The idea that certain macronutrients are inherently more fattening is a myth. Some foods do lead to more weight gain, not because they alter metabolism, but because they make us eat more without realizing it. So let me ask you a question. What's the most effective way to make a rat overeat? In the 1970s, obesity researchers struggled to fatten rats quickly for weight gain studies. Simply adding extra fat to their rat food worked, but it took months. Then, by complete chance, researcher Anthony Sclafani discovered a game changer. He accidentally placed a rat near his bowl of Fruit Loops cereal, and the rat devoured it instantly. This made Sclafani wonder, could human junk food be more fattening than high-fat rat food? To test this, he filled cages with highly palatable, calorie-dense foods. The results were shocking. The rats ignored their standard food and gorged on the junk, becoming obese in just weeks, something that normally takes months. Sclafani called it the supermarket diet, but today, researchers refer to it as the cafeteria diet, which is still the most effective way to make a rat overeat. This diet wasn't just high in fat or sugar, it was the combination of variety, flavor, and calorie density, which we will expand on more in later chapters, that drove the rats to overconsume. And if all this sounds familiar, let me ask you another question. What's the most effective way to make a human overeat? Well, in the 1990s, scientists accidentally discovered a foolproof method. At the time, researchers struggled to measure how much people really ate. Self-reported data showed that obese people ate the same number of calories as lean people, but more accurate methods revealed a major flaw. People underreport their calorie intake by as much as 2,000 calories per day. So to get precise measurements, Eric Ravison and his team designed a study where participants lived in a metabolic ward stocked with giant vending machines of highly tempting foods. These participants could eat whatever they wanted, whenever they wanted. The results? They consumed 173% of their normal caloric intake and gained about 5 pounds in just 1 week. Ravison called this phenomenon opportunistic voracity. Given unlimited access to high-calorie, hyper-palatable foods, people overate effortlessly. So what's the takeaway? The main driver of overeating isn't hunger, but instead easy access to tempting high-calorie dense foods. Sound familiar? Well, that's modern life in a nutshell. But to better understand overeating, we have to cover food addiction. Your brain is constantly making decisions and selecting the most valuable actions while filtering out the rest. Whether it's choosing between studying and scrolling or deciding whether to fight or flee, this process happens automatically. Take eating as an example. First, your brain filters your needs. If hunger is the strongest, you feel an urge to eat. Then, different options compete. You can grab food from the fridge, order a pizza, or go to a restaurant. Things like convenience, cost, and past experience all influence this decision, and the most compelling one wins. Now, interestingly, these decisions happen subconsciously before you even become aware of them. Your brain makes the choice first, and only after the fact do you realize that you made the decision. When discussing food addiction, we must also understand dopamine. Dopamine is often misunderstood as the pleasure chemical, but it primarily drives motivation motivation and learning. While endorphins in our opioid system is responsible for pleasure, dopamine strengthens the link between action and reward, increasing the chance of repeating certain behaviors. And so, addictive substances like drugs and junk food hijack the system by triggering excessive dopamine release. Highly processed foods, especially those rich in sugar, fat, and refined carbs, actually act similarly to drugs by intensifying cravings and compulsive consumption. Just as coca leaves are mildly stimulating but become highly addictive when refined to cocaine, processed foods also become addictive when concentrated and refined. Now, dopamine also influences our decision making. When we see or smell food cues, like pastries in a bakery, our dopamine spikes, making us more likely to indulge. But this response is much weaker for less rewarding foods. Walking by a frozen vegetable aisle isn't going to release as much dopamine as walking by the junk food aisle. Since dopamine adjusts motivation according to how big we think the reward is going to be, highly palatable foods drive stronger cravings and overeating. One of the best strategies for managing food cravings is minimizing exposure to triggers. So here is your first practical tip. Avoid food cues. By 1, not keeping junk in sight, meaning no cookie jar. 2, stay away from tempting environments like malls or going out with friends too often. And 3, if you find that you just can't stop buying junk food at a certain store, try to break the cycle, take a different route home, or next time go around it. All of this reduces cravings without needing to use willpower. While on the topic of dopamine, let's go over instant versus delayed gratification. The choice between eating chocolate and staying healthy or saving money involves a conflict with your monkey brain and your rational brain. Eating the chocolate gives an immediate reward, but the costs like gaining weight and potential health issues are not paid by you today, but rather by your future self. Your rational brain understands this well, but your monkey brain is focused on the present. The concept of delayed discounting, or in other terms, delayed gratification, explains this idea. In the famous 1970 Stanford marshmallow experiment, children chose between 1 marshmallow now or 2 later. Most ate the marshmallow right away, undervaluing the future reward. A follow-up study showed that those who were better at delaying gratification as children were actually leaner as adults. This habit to prioritize immediate rewards goes way beyond food to behaviors like drug addiction, gambling, and financial irresponsibility. You see, the human brain evolved in an environment where the future was uncertain. Early humans had a 50% chance of surviving past the age of 35, so it kind of made sense to prioritize the here and now. Now, I didn't call this a habit for no reason, because here is one method known as episodic future thinking that can help you better delay gratification. So your second practical tip is to vividly imagine positive future events, such as an upcoming vacation or your birthday, whenever you feel the urge to do a bad habit or be impulsive. Studies by Leonard Epstein have shown that this technique can reduce calorie-dense food intake in obese individuals by 30%. This works both for adults and children by allowing your brain to value your future self more. Even with all of these psychological tricks in mind, we forgot to cover possibly the most important factor that determines how much food we eat in a day. That factor is palatability, or how good foods taste. Research shows that people tend to eat 44% more when the food is particularly delicious. Whoa, who would have thought? But here's something that changed the way I looked at this topic forever. In 1965, a study further explored this by feeding people a bland liquid diet. Even though the diet was nutritionally complete, it lacked variety, smell, and taste. On this diet, lean people maintained their caloric intake, but obese participants ate far fewer calories and lost weight without ever feeling hungry. One obese man lost 100 pounds over the course of several months, and when the study concluded, he begged for the liquid formula, which he got to take home, and with that, he lost another 100 pounds. This suggests that people with obesity may actually be more sensitive to food rewards, causing overeating when foods are more stimulating. Additionally, in 2010, Chris Voigt ate only potatoes for 60 days. Despite not trying to lose weight, he lost 21 pounds, improved his health markers, and found it hard to eat enough because he simply wasn't hungry. This shows us how bland, repetitive diets can reduce calorie intake without hunger. The third practical tip you can take away is eat more bland foods. The more bland we make our diets over time, the more weight we can effortlessly lose. And not bland in the sense of chicken, broccoli, and rice, but if we can over time replace foods like Oreos with well-seasoned chicken breast and potatoes, this will make a huge change in how much food we actually want to eat. So every single month, switch one highly processed junk food item for a single ingredient bland food. Do this over the span of months and years, and eventually you will cure your overeating. Now there's this common, strange, politically correct advice to say eat a varied diet. But what if I told you that food variety can actually lead to overeating? The more different foods are, the more we tend to overeat. In a 1981 study by Barbara Rolls, participants rated 8 different foods based on taste and then ate one for lunch. Afterwards, when they rated the same foods again, the one they just ate for lunch was less appealing. However, when offered all 8 foods, they ate more, even though they said they were full from the first course. This phenomenon, called sensory-specific satiety, perfectly explains why we can stop enjoying one food but still crave others, just like dessert after a large meal. This also explains the buffet effect, where we tend to overeat at buffets even though the food isn't that great. To avoid this, simply limit yourself to a few items. So here is your 4th practical tip. When you're at a buffet, Thanksgiving meal, or a Christmas gathering, choose 3 foods that would make a satisfying meal and stick to them. This strategy will leave you feeling full with fewer calories. Now, does this sound like you have to sacrifice a little bit of fun to reach your goals? Well, that's because you do. If you can't afford to make little sacrifices just like this, you can forget about weight loss and go watch some other soft little YouTuber that's gonna recommend to you their detox drink. Now, you may be thinking,
okay, Mr. Savvy, I get it. Obesity and overeating is all in my head.
Before we get too far, there actually are some genetic components that go into how much we eat. And for that reason, we have to discuss the reward value of food. The relative reinforcing value of food, RRV food, refers to how much effort someone is willing to put in to get food compared to other rewards. And this varies significantly between individuals. Some people are highly motivated by food while others are not so much. People who are overweight or obese tend to have higher RRV food compared to lean people, meaning they genetically find food more rewarding and are more likely to eat larger quantities. And what's cool is that this heightened food motivation can actually predict future weight gain, as individuals with higher RRV food actually tend to gain more weight as time goes on. But just like addiction research, how likely you are to overeat also involves impulsivity, which is the ability to control cravings. People with high RRV food but good impulse control can enjoy food without overindulging. However, those with high RRV food and poor impulse control essentially have a lead foot and worn brakes, making them extremely likely to overeat and be obese. Ultimately, there are 3 factors that determine eating behavior: food availability, food motivation, and self-control. Since we can't delete McDonald's from existence and we can't go back in time to choose different parents, the only thing we can really do is fix our brakes, or in other words, improve our impulsivity. So here's your 5th practical tip. Impulse control is just like a muscle. You use it, you go to failure, and it gets stronger the next day when you wake up. When you crave junk food, try to push that craving as far as you can later and later into the day. Eventually you will cave, but just focus on caving in less every day, week, or month. So for example, let's say you're a little bit more advanced and you only eat junk food 2 times per week. Try to lower it down to once per week, and then over time to 3 times per month, 2 times per month, and then eventually, when you're only eating junk food once per month, I assure you, you will not be overweight. You want to slowly phase junk food out of your life. Another more hands-on impulse control exercise that you can try is buy the most appealing junk food and put it on the desk right beside you. Stare at it and take notes of all of the thoughts that arise. Your brain will try to convince you to eat the junk food, but you simply have to not give in. Do this every single day and try to last longer and longer up until you can keep the food right beside you for months and not cave in at all. With all of this in mind, let's go back in time. For 99.5% of our species, humans were hunter-gatherers. We've only been farmers for 0.5% and industrialized for less than 0.008%. This rapid change in food systems happening in less than 100 years hasn't given us enough time to genetically adapt, which led to obesity. You see, if we take a look at hunter-gatherer societies that still exist, they all share 3 key features that we can copy. They have limited food variety, their foods are much less calorie dense, and lastly, they only had 1 or 2 cooking methods. In contrast, the average American grocery store holds 44,000 items. All of this variety reduces our sensory-specific satiety, meaning the more options we have, the less likely we are to feel full. Even going back 100 years when we were far skinnier, Americans spent 93% of their food budget on food at home. Today, that number is split 50-50, and what's even more shocking is that fast food spending has increased by 900% since the 1960s. But look, as if that's not bad enough, if we take a closer peek at what most people actually eat at home, you'll come to find that most of it is still bullshit. bullshit. Compared to wild tribes who used to only really eat meat, vegetables, nuts, and honey, people at home are eating things like frozen pizza and Hot Pockets. Now let's not forget about caffeine and alcohol. Caffeine, while being calorie-free on its own, is usually paired with cream and sugar, giving it extra unnecessary calories. And alcohol itself is rich in calories, and even more so if you drink it in the form of beer or wine. With all of this in mind, here's your 6th practical tip. I know a lot of people that say,
"Oh, I like the process of making coffee and I enjoy beer."
but do you remember the very first time you tried coffee or alcohol? It was repulsive, right? What you need to realize is that these foods are naturally disgusting, and the only reason your body enjoys them is due to the dopamine release after consumption. These substances are drugs. Grow the fuck up and stop making excuses for enjoying their effects. You don't drink beer because you like the taste. You drink it because you want to get buzzed. And look, I'm not here to judge you for that, but if you want a simple hack to lose weight, instead of drinking coffee with milk and sugar, switch to black coffee or 0-calorie energy drinks. You can even take caffeine in the form of pills. And instead of drinking beer or wine, drink stronger spirits. This is a very easy way to reduce the calories, still get the effects, and this exact tip is what allowed me to lose 10 pounds effortlessly when I first started dieting. Another major factor that influences our food choices is our environment. In one study, office assistants were given Hershey's candies in 3 different locations. If it was on their desk, they ate 9 per day. If it was in a drawer, they ate 6 per day. And if it was in a filing cabinet 6 feet away, they only ate 4 per day. This proves a simple point. The harder food is to access, the less we eat. Even minor barriers like opening a drawer or having to walk to another room can dramatically reduce consumption. And so here is the practical takeaway and your 7th tip. Make food inconvenient. Peeling an orange or having to shell nuts will slow you down and leave you more mindful compared to opening a bag of chips and gorging right away. A personal strategy I like to use whenever I go on my dieting phases is I never buy junk food and I never leave it at the house. If I really want junk food, I have to drive all the way to the store and only buy what I'm going to eat for that one day. This adds a ton of friction, giving me time to reconsider instead of making a quick impulsive decision. But what if we take a more broad approach? What actually regulates our appetite? Surely if we knew this, we can get one step closer to never overeating. Well, let me introduce you to the lipostat system. The body has a built-in system that regulates food intake and fat storage. This system works to stabilize body fat levels over time, making significant weight loss and weight gain difficult and often temporary. Understanding how the lipostat system works can explain why appetite, metabolism, and fat storage react the way they do when we diet or overeat. One of the clearest demonstrations of our body's resistance to weight changes comes from the Minnesota starvation experiment, where participants were semi-starved for 6 months. Once they were allowed to eat again, they experienced a powerful drive to regain the weight, often overshooting their original weight before eventually stabilizing. On the flip side, Ethan Sims's research on prison inmates showed that forced overfeeding had the opposite problem. Some inmates had to eat upwards of 10,000 calories per day just to sustain noticeable long-term weight gain, because their bodies would ramp up their metabolism and energy expenditure in response to extra calories. The key player in the system is a hormone called leptin. Produced by fat cells, leptin tells the brain when energy stores are sufficient, helping regulate appetite and metabolism. In lean individuals, leptin keeps body fat within a narrow range by reducing hunger and increasing energy expenditure when fat stores are high, and increasing hunger and reducing metabolism when fat stores are low. In experiments with mice, injecting leptin into normal weight mice caused them to lose almost all of their fat. However, giving leptin to obese mice had no effect. Why was that? This was because they already had high leptin levels, but their brain just wasn't processing the signal. This is called leptin resistance, a phenomenon seen in human obesity, where the brain just doesn't register normal levels of leptin, making it harder to feel full and regulate weight. You see, everybody's body has a set point for the fat level that they should have. This explains why dieting often leads to intense cravings and a slow calorie burn. So how can you lower your fat set point? One of the most effective ways to combat weight gain is to reduce the palatability of foods. Exercise also plays a key role in lowering your fat set point. Researchers found that fit rats defend a lower fat set point even when fed a fattening diet. And this makes sense. If you exercise and eat the same diet as a person who doesn't exercise, you're still going to be skinnier than that person. Another major factor is NEAT, which is non-exercise activity thermogenesis. This includes unconscious movements like fidgeting, pacing around, adjusting posture. So here is your 8th practical tip, but it's more like 3 different tips. To reduce palatability but also make sure that your hunger doesn't rise, increase your protein intake. The standard for this is 1 gram per pound of body weight, or even more if you want to push the satiation effect. To lower your fat set point, consider doing cardio, but being an avid cardio hater myself, instead I can recommend strength training, as not only does it burn some calories during the workout, but also the muscle gained is more metabolically active, meaning it burns up more calories, and thus in turn you'll be able to eat more. Lastly, to increase your NEAT, my favorite way of going about this is simply having an active job. Something like construction can burn 500 to 1000 calories per day without you putting in really any effort, but if you aren't willing to quit your job in pursuit of fat loss glory, consider using stimulants like methamphetamine so you can twitch off the calories all day. On a more serious note, caffeine is a great way to speed up your metabolism, move around a little bit more, but not only that, it also helps to reduce your appetite. You can also try to increase your step count, park further away from work, take the stairs, but honestly this makes such a little difference that I don't even recommend doing it, and when people tell you this advice, don't really listen to them. Because when I was fat, I didn't do that shit either. So the bottom line here is, obesity isn't just about willpower. As we've covered thus far, it's a mixture of biology, environment, and behavior. While genetics do influence weight, the modern food environment is the primary driver of obesity. The key to long-term weight management isn't just cutting calories temporarily, but lowering our fat set point by focusing on less palatable whole foods, staying active, and managing the food environment. As geneticist Francis Collins puts it, genetics loads the gun, but environment pulls the trigger. Now before we get onto the last few more soothing topics, let me hit you with some harsh research that might scare you into losing weight. This is obesity brain damage. Obese people suffer from a mild form of brain injury in the hypothalamus, which is the area of the brain responsible for regulating food intake and fat gain. The scariest implication is that the food we eat can cause damage to the parts of the brain that regulate body weight, appetite, blood sugar, and reproductive health, making fat gain a self-sustaining cycle. While brain damage might sound like a hopeless statement, there's light at the end of the tunnel. In mice switching to a healthier diet that helped them lose fat, their brain inflammation reversed even if they were obese for a very long time. We still don't know if this is true for humans, but it is suggested that there's hope for recovery. So the 9th practical tip here is don't binge eat. When you overeat, you inflame your brain and add just a little bit more damage to the hypothalamus. Eat until you're full, be satiated, but eating to the point where you want to vomit is highly suspected to cause brain damage. Getting on to something a little bit more lighthearted, let's cover sleep. A Columbia University study found that sleep-deprived patients ate 300 more calories per day than those that slept 9 hours. Sleep restriction essentially tricks your body into thinking that you need more energy and thus you crave more food. Another study on mice found that eating out of sync with your circadian rhythm led to 2.5 times more weight gain even when calorie intake was exactly the same between 2 groups, which clearly shows that eating at the time when you should be sleeping over long periods of time disrupts metabolism and promotes fat storage. Now, if you sleep 6 hours per night, listen very carefully. In a 2-week study, people who slept 6 hours or less showed major cognitive decline, meaning they were stupider compared to the people who slept 8 hours. What's worse than that is they didn't realize how impaired they actually were, meaning they felt fine, but they were not fine. So you'll often hear people saying,
I sleep 6 hours and I'm fine. I just don't need that much sleep.
9 times out of 10, these people have already adjusted to their lower cognitive standpoint and they just can't really tell the difference. So the 10-hour per day smart guy sleepers may be asking themselves right now, wouldn't being awake for 4 extra hours increase your metabolism and thus burn more calories than if you were sleeping? To some extent, yes. Studies show that while sleep deprivation does increase fat burn by roughly 100 calories, it also increases food intake by 300 calories, which gives you a net gain of 200 extra calories per day, and thus you would gain weight over time. People who regularly sleep 6 hours or less tend to gain more weight and are more impulsive, making longer term goals like weight loss much harder to stick to compared to people who slept 7 or 9 hours per night. So how can you improve your sleep? As your 10th practical tip tip, here are a few things that you can implement. Stick to a regular sleep schedule. Wake up and go to bed at the same time every day. Yes, even on the weekends. You're not 16 years old anymore. Stop waking up at 11 a.m. on the weekend like a stoner. Reduce your blue light exposure at night. So don't use any technology roughly 1 hour before bed, or if you do, use apps such as Flux on the computer or Twilight on mobile phones. iPhones have a night mode, and if you don't want to do any of that, you can also use glasses that block blue light. Set a bedtime alarm. Everybody has a wake up alarm, but no one has a bedtime alarm. It's actually more important to fall asleep at the right time than to wake up at the right time. Be in bed within a 15-minute window every night for the optimal sleep results. You can invest in a sleep tracker. This was really eye-opening for me because then you get the real data to see how poor your sleep actually is. And so when you make these little improvements, you can actually see whether your sleep got better or worse. Here are a few rapid fire tips. Sleep in a cold room. Don't eat a large meal before bed. Don't exercise 1 to 2 hours before sleep. Use blackout curtains. Make sure there's no lights in your room. Keep your phone out of your room. Don't use stimulants before bed. Like, good luck trying to fall asleep after a candy flip without Xanax. And lastly, experiment with sleep timing. I've tried everything from 7 to 11 hours in bed, and personally what I find works best for me is roughly 8.5 hours in bed, which will roughly give me 7 to 8 hours of actual sleep. Prioritizing sleep isn't just about feeling rested. It's one of the easiest ways to control your weight, improve focus, and overall make better choices every single day. Going hand in hand with sleep, let's cover stress. Now, stress affects the brain in very complex ways, influencing both appetite and food intake. While acute stress, like the flu or a car accident, often suppresses appetite, chronic stress can have the opposite effect. A 2007 Stress in America report found that 79% of people change their eating habits when stressed. 43% of people overeat, while 36% skip meals. See, whether stress makes you eat more or less highly depends on what type of stress you're going through. There are two main types of stress: controllable and uncontrollable. Uncontrollable stress, like a toxic job or financial struggles, raise cortisol significantly, making overeating and weight gain much more likely. While controllable stress, like preparing for an exam, still increases cortisol, but to a much smaller extent. So the point here is having a sense of control over stressors makes it far less damaging. With that in mind, here is your 11th practical tip and also a bonus hack to not get fat when stressed. The best way to make uncontrollable stress controllable is by planning out how to fix it. So if you have any type of financial problem, make a roadmap to how you're going to solve it. This flips stress on its head and will make it far more manageable for you. Now, for the weird hack that was promised, essentially a study was done on rats trying to see whether sugar or artificial sweeteners reduce stress. And surprisingly, both substances had the stress relieving effects, meaning in both rats and humans, it's the sweet taste itself, not the calories, that actually reduce stress. So next time you're stressed and craving something sweet, instead of eating sugar, try a 0-calorie sweetener. You'll get the psychological relief without the excess weight gain. So a practical example here would be drinking diet soda instead of regular soda, having protein bars instead of chocolate bars, Halo Top ice cream instead of full fat, full calorie Ben & Jerry's ice cream, and the list goes on. And so as promised, here is the bonus 16th chapter. Let's summarize everything we've learned in a 6-step fat loss checklist. I'll also leave a more in-depth free PDF checklist in the first link in the description. Now, if you skip to the end of the video without watching any of it, that's fine, but I still recommend you watch the entire video. Yes, it will boost my watch time, but also context and examples really matter when learning something new. There's a reason why books are typically 200 pages of stories and examples and only 10 pages of actual advice. But regardless, here are the practical tools. Number 1. Fix your food environment. Reduce exposure to food cues. Keep calorie-dense foods out of sight, out of your home, or out of work. If you really want it, you have to drive to the store to get it. Create more effort barriers. Only keep foods in your house that require preparation, like fruits, meat, and vegetables. Lastly, minimize food advertising exposure. Avoid food commercials, social media triggers, and environments that make you crave foods like malls, bakeries, and restaurants. Number 2, manage your appetite. Choose food foods with low calorie density, high protein, and fiber. So think vegetables, fresh meat, beans, and yogurt. If you're going to eat starch, make sure it's water rich. So something like oatmeal and potatoes versus calorie dense flour products like bread and crackers. And be sure to keep your lipostat satisfied. Maintain a stable fat set point by eating 1 gram per pound of body weight in protein, get regular exercise, get good sleep, and control your stress. Number 3, beware of food reward. You want to avoid highly rewarding foods that override your satiety signals like ice cream, chocolate, cookies, and french fries, for example. Choose simpler, natural, single ingredient foods to better regulate your eating behaviors. And also be sure to watch out for habit forming substances in your foods like caffeine and alcohol. If you're going to have caffeine, don't drink sodas or coffees with a bunch of sugar. Have black coffee. If you're gonna drink alcohol, don't have beer or wine, have spirits. Number 4, make sleep a priority. Quality sleep regulates hunger and weight. Make sure you have a consistent sleep schedule 7 days a week, falling asleep within a 15-minute time period. Along with this, support your circadian rhythm by getting morning sunlight, reduce blue light before going to bed, and treat any sleep disorders like sleep apnea. Number 5, move your body. Exercise burns calories and regulates appetite. Even if you get more hungry after exercise, you usually never overcompensate. Mix moderate exercise like walking with intense exercise like sprinting, and also a bit of strength training every single week for the best weight regulation. To speed up your metabolism, try active commuting like walking or biking to certain locations, and overall try to increase your step count to around 10,000 steps per day. Lastly, number 6, manage stress. First, identify if you are a stress eater. If you are, pinpoint chronic stressors, whether that's work, money, health, or relationships. Take control and create plans for those stressors. You want to turn uncontrollable stress to something that you can control. Some other activities that help with stress is meditation and behavioral therapies. What the hell does that mean to a practical person? It means stop overthinking. You want to over time replace stress eating with healthier coping mechanisms such as exercise, socializing, and other hobbies that you enjoy. Remove any lingering comfort food, and that should break the habit. If you want more help, press the first link in the description. For more detail, consider reading Stefan Guyenet's The Hungry Brain, which I read over multiple times in the making of this video. Subscribe to the channel, and don't forget to stay savvy with your diet.